Christmas. Part 1. We always talked about white Christmases, but there rarely was one. They were mostly gray and wet cold that cut through our mackinaws when we went for the tree. Preacher mule pulling the sled down through the pasture and across a cotton field, with some unpicked still hanging ragged white on the stalks, to the bottom of cane and honeysuckle and sawbriars, and a few patches of cedars or pines. We'd look at every tree. We could cut the top out of a big one, Uncle V. Then we'd tie it to the sled, and Preacher would pull it up the hill, his breath smoking from his nostrils, some of us running ahead to tell the coming of the best Christmas tree. Part 2. In the kitchen, Allie Joe and Aunt Callie popped corn from a little patch Uncle V planted every year on the edge of a feed corn field. Sometimes the August sun was so hot it would pop on the cob, and strung it on sewing thread, coiling it on the table like a snake of popcorn. And we'd try a handful, complaining at the taste. We didn't put no salt on it unless you boys eat it all before we get it strung. Uncle V mounted the tree on some scrap boards and set it upright in a corner across the room away from the fireplace. One spark, boys, a whole house'll go. When the popcorn snake was wrapped in and around the tree, we tied ribbons on the branches and hung last year's Christmas cards Aunt Callie had saved, most with a manger scene or a picture of stained glass windows, which we would see only years later in city churches where the people had money and the preachers thought stained glass was important. Sometimes we stuck cotton balls in the tree, and one year Aunt Callie tried making snow from ivory snow like in a magazine, but it dried and crumbled on the floor, and Uncle V said it was more mess than it was worth. We blew balloons and tied them like colored balls, and when the pine needles popped them, we would suck the rubber pieces into little balloons in our mouths, then twist and tie them, making the tree shabby with colored rags of rubber. Part 3. Cousin Hamer had a crystal radio with earphones because he was blind from when one of his brothers hit him in the eye with a sweet gum ball. Them boys was meaner than house dogs, but they didn't mean no harm. And we took turns listening to Christmas carols from big churches off somewhere, probably Memphis. He would tune and tune the radio and pass the earphones around until the batteries got weak and the music sounded farther and farther away. Then we'd sing for him and have a prayer and go home, always blowing out the lamps before we left, because he didn't need the light. Part 4. We called Brazil nuts nigger toes, and we called chocolate-covered creams nigger toes, and we got both kinds at Christmas, and tangerines like oranges that were easy to peel, stockings, big boot socks full of tangerines and pecans and jawbreakers and sometimes a grapefruit. Uncle V always saved the biggest ham in the smokehouse, salt-cured and smoked and 2 years hanging, and Aunt Callie would soak it and simmer it all day, then chill it in the coldest corner of the bedroom farthest from the fireplace, and Uncle V would sharpen the butcher knife until we'd be scared to touch it, and slice the ham so thin we could almost see through it. Mind grabbing no scraps like that, boys. Good way to lose a finger. We put the ham in biscuits, not fat dough biscuits, but thin, crusty ones baked special for Christmas. The rest of the food was the same as any Sunday, only there'd be more of it. Maybe 3 kinds of meat, and more cakes and pies and tea cakes, and we even got to eat between meals. Part 5. Morning was always early, but Christmas was extra early. The first up stoking the fire and getting in wood, not complaining of the cold floor or the early chores. Santa would have eaten his tea cakes and drunk his coffee and left us clothes mostly, a belt or gloves or rubber boots or flowered shirts and dresses from feed sack patterns we had seen in the feed shed, but never questioned that reindeer feed must also come in printed sacks. One year there was a mold for lead soldiers and a little melting pot and a bar of lead. Now you got to be extra careful with that hot lead, boys. And we made the same soldiers and killed them in battle and melted them down and made them again until we burned out the mold. Part 6. Everybody acted happier, except when we prayed that all the soldier boys would be home from the war by next Christmas. We went to church and sang carols and sometimes acted out the baby Jesus story, using old sheets and robes to be wise men and shepherds. And the preacher said, "Wouldn't it be nice if we could keep the spirit of Christmas all year long?" And we thought it would be nice, and told ourselves we'd try.